Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're spotlighting a significant event that has the potential to reshape geopolitical alliances: Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Russia. Now, it is a complex story of geopolitics and nuclear saber-rattling. According to reports, Russia under Putin is ramping up its nuclear rhetoric once again. If you thought international diplomacy was as simple as a handshake and a photo op, think again. This is a high-stakes game where every move is calculated and every word scrutinized. So, without further ado, let's take a closer look at our latest report to find out more.
Modi's controversial visit to Moscow, which coincided with Russia's missiles raining down on a children's hospital in Ukraine, could be a sign that the West's sanctions and attempts to isolate Putin over his war are having a limited effect. The visit, marred by Russia's recent military actions in Ukraine, coincided with discussions that highlighted India's pivotal role as a steadfast customer of Russian oil and gas.
Several countries have been facing the problem of petrol and diesel price hikes recently. However, due to India and Russia's energy cooperation, we have been able to control inflation and help the citizens of our country by providing them with stability, for which I would like to express my gratitude.
Russia and India are also poised to expand their nuclear cooperation, potentially involving the construction of 6 new high-power reactors and next-generation small nuclear power plants in India. They are likely not only to keep oil and gas trade going, but they are also looking to take advantage of the Arctic's rapidly melting ice for the northern trading route.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, why is Modi's visit to Russia such a big deal? Let's break it down. Modi's trip comes at a time when Russia is increasingly isolated on a global stage due to its ongoing war in Ukraine and subsequent Western sanctions. For Putin, Modi's visit is a diplomatic lifeline, signaling that Russia still has powerful friends outside the West. For Modi, it's an opportunity to strengthen India's strategic autonomy and enhance its global standing. First, let's talk about the economic angle. India and Russia have long-standing trade relations, especially in the defense sector. Russia is one of India's top arms suppliers, and this relationship is crucial for India's military modernization efforts. But it's not just about guns and tanks. Now, energy is another key component of the Indo-Russian relationship. With global energy markets in flux, India is looking to secure stable and affordable energy supplies. Russia, with its vast reserve of oil and natural gas, is a critical partner in this regard. Modi's visit is likely to result in new agreements on energy cooperation, ensuring that India's growing economy has the fuel it needs to keep running. Now let's dive into the geopolitical implications. Modi's visit comes amidst heightened tension between the West and Russia, and by engaging with Russia, India is signaling its commitment to maintaining a balanced foreign policy. Now, this move aligns with India's long-standing principle of non-alignment, which aims to avoid entanglement in power blocks while fostering strategic partnership with multiple countries. However, this does not come without its challenges. India's close ties with the United States and other Western nations mean that Modi must tread carefully. Any perceived shift towards Russia could strain these relations. Yet, India's strategic autonomy means that it seeks to engage with all major powers without being overly dependent on any single one. But what about the elephant in the room, the war in Ukraine? Well, Modi has maintained a cautious stance, advocating for dialogue and peaceful resolution. India's position on the Ukraine war is complex. While it has abstained from voting against Russia in international forums, it has also called for respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Modi's visit is also significant in the context of India's broader foreign policy goals, as India seeks to play a more prominent role in the global stage. It is leveraging its relationship with major powers to bolster its international standing. Engaging with Russia is part of this broader strategy to assert itself as an independent and influential global actor. In conclusion, Modi's visit to Russia is about strengthening bilateral ties, securing economic investments, and navigating international relations. As the world watches, every handshake, every word, and every agreement will be analyzed and dissected for its broader implications, because in this game, it's not just about who you know, but how you play. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Mario Bonavita, a researcher in international relations at King's College London. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good morning. Thank you for hosting me.
So we are taking a look at Modi's visit to Moscow, meeting Vladimir Putin today. And the big question is, what are their intentions? Do you see a new alliance forming, or do you think this is just something out of convenience?
Well, as you know, India has historically been quite close to Russia, especially during the Cold War. And this type of relationship is something which has continued even after. Now, in recent years, because of the rise of communist China as a threat in East Asia, especially in the Indo-Pacific, the relationship between the West and India has come closer. However, in Indian foreign policy, Russia still plays a very important role, not just because of its historical legacy, but specifically because of strategic visions. India has always been very keen to try to maintain open channels with Russia, just to avoid Moscow and Beijing to come too closer.
Right. So when we look at geopolitics on the international arena, a lot of countries that have been voting against Ukraine or voting in line with Russia on places like UN gets a lot of flack. We see Hungary, we see various other countries. But India in particular doesn't seem to get the kind of criticism when they voted against Ukraine or alongside Russia in the UN. Why is that?
Well, obviously, the relationship between the West and India is framed around the issue of security. The more the Chinese rise poses threats to international security, the more there is an attempt by the West to come closer to players like India to try to maintain a balance in the wider region. Therefore, it is clear that some governments might be a little bit skeptical before openly criticizing the position of India in this type of issues as a way to try to maintain a positive relationship with New Delhi.
Right, so there is a little bit of leniency there when it comes to dealing with India from the West. And another question of mine would also be the energy trade after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We see a large spike in Russian oil going into India and from India coming into Europe. Is that the main way that Russia have been skirting sanctions when it comes to energy, or are there any other methods that is being applied?
No, certainly this plays a very important role. At the end of the day, it is also in the West's interest that part of this energy supply goes to India rather than directly to China for obvious reasons. So also from our side, the in closer relationship that Delhi and Moscow have had since the decision of the European Union to impose sanctions and to divert energetic interest from Russia to other suppliers has been something perceived to at least behind closed door in a positive way. Now, there is a triangulation which certainly is taking place there, but again, I don't see that Western countries are ready to openly criticize this, as it has, at the end of the day, a strategic importance to try to avoid China for getting too many resources, and it is also convenient.
All right, but in this case, my question would be, wouldn't that create a perverse incentive for India to want the war in Ukraine to, basically drag on so they can keep reaping this benefit of being the middleman when it comes to trading energy?
Well, certainly that might play a role, but we have to think that for India, this is a much larger game than just a simply economic interest or just to play the middleman, in the sense that India is facing a direct threat from communist China to the Himalayan border, which has created a lot of casualties in the last few years. And we see certainly that the rising assertiveness of communist China in the Indian Ocean region is posing a threat in terms of the infiltration that China has in medium and smaller powers, South Asia and around the Indian Ocean region. Therefore, the strategic vision for India to try to keep channels open with Russia goes much beyond the simple economic or energetic interest.
All right, so if you can help us dissect that a little bit, that would be great. Like you mentioned, there's a bigger game to be played here with India being threatened by China. They do have to pursue that relation with Russia. So when we turn back to our attention to the war that is currently ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, do you think India is more incentivized to see Ukraine win or to have the war drag on, to see Russia win? From India's perspective, what is actually more beneficial to them?
No, this is a very good question. For India's point of view, obviously, the question about security remains a question related very much to China. So the issue about the Ukrainian conflict, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's something which plays a role in the sense that it's diverting attention from the issues in the Indo-Pacific, and is certainly pushing Russia closer to China. An ideal probably solution for India would be to have a ceasefire and the situation where it tries to go back to normality. However, as we know very well, the situation on the ground is much different, and Russia's aggression against Ukraine is probably not going to end in a positive way for either one or the other actor.
Right. Do you think there's an attempt from Western countries to try to bring India back to its fold so it can, sort of still have India as an ally to counteract China without having it being driven into the arms of Russia?
Well, certainly there has been a long discussion about this, and in the last 20 years, and especially since the rise of China, more or less 10 years ago, there has been strong attempts by the West, especially the United States, to forge a new partnership with India, which has been successful to a certain extent. The common vision and the common need for security versus Chinese rise is inevitably driving the two sides together. However, it's obvious at the same time that the West has limited possibility right now to pressure India to go away from its partnership with Russia, if not for other obvious reasons that are part of the Indian foreign policy. Going beyond the security element, certainly India shares visions with other emerging economies and countries about the way they would want the international system to work. And this is part of the platforms that they share in the global south. And this is certainly something which the West is still working on to try to accommodate India's interest. However, obviously India needs to maintain its own leadership there. So trying to convince India to break its partnership with Russia is not necessarily something that will be possible in the next few years. However, as we all know, at the end of the day, what will determine the evolution of this situation and others is the way in which the US-China competition will be framed. So the more security, the more the security situation will deteriorate, the more countries will have to pick a side inevitably.
So we do understand that perhaps the West does not have enough leverage on India to achieve these sort of things. But what about the other way around? Do you think India itself has enough leverage, being one of the energy traders with Russia right now, to bring anything up to the negotiation table? Say if Modi wants to discuss any sort of peace plans, ceasefire, do they have a voice in this dialogue?
Well, there is certainly an aspiration. At least Mr. Modi has expressed this since the very beginning of the war, to try to convince the sides to come back to the table. To what extent Indian diplomacy will be involved in this, it will really depend on the evolution of the situation between the contenders on the ground. It is quite possible that India might play a role when there is a certain aspiration for peace talks, to the extent that India could be in the room where the decisions are taken and try to mediate between the two.
And as we see, they're currently leveraging the international relation quite well, being friendly with the United States, that of Russia. Do you think that would eventually give India a more prominent role in the international arena?
Well, India has already gained a very prominent role. As you know very well, last year there was the G20 hosted by India, which was quite successful in this sense. So the previous G20 included in its the final declaration a clear condemnation of Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was not present in the final comments of the G20 in India, and this is clearly demonstrated the way in which India at the same time hosted security meetings with Western partners, but was also quite capable of avoiding any type of controversies in order to show that the G20 was inclusive and successful. So India is already playing an important role to a certain extent there. The issue is that the more assertive China becomes and the more China claims spaces in areas and groups where India has been historically present, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the BRICS, the more inevitably questions will raise in Delhi of to what extent and to how successfully can India contend this rising influence.
Right, so turning back to how we started this conversation in the first place, Modi's visit to Moscow, do you see anything, do you notice anything out of the ordinary, something that needs to be highlighted during this meeting that could be pivotal to the direction, be it India, be it Russia, going forward?
Well, certainly it's quite clear that despite the fact that India has tried to divert its military investments and supply, there is still a strong partnership, which is there, and it was part of the discussion. There is certainly the aspiration of the two countries to try to maintain an open and clear dialogue. The timing of the visit is quite disturbing for some Western actors because it came at the same time when the NATO summit was taking place in Washington. So the fact that India has decided to go to Russia despite that event taking place is a clear sign that despite the fact that the India-Russia relationship is declining, it will remain a feature in Indian foreign policy for the next years.
Right, and that about wraps it all up. So thank you so much for helping us dissect this very complicated situation. Thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. NATO allies have started the transfer of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. The announcement came during the NATO summit in Washington, where President Joe Biden sought to rally Western allies.
The transfer of F-16s from Denmark and the Netherlands to Ukraine fulfills a promise made last year to bolster Ukraine's air capabilities, crucial for countering Russia's air superiority. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his appreciation and confidence that these jets would bring closer the prospects of lasting peace. The urgency for military aid was recently emphasized by the recent Russian missile strikes on a children's hospital in Kyiv, which resulted in the death of 38 people. Hence, arming Ukraine's air defenses was a top priority on the NATO summit agenda. However, Russia views the move with suspicion. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called NATO an alliance that considers Russia an enemy and accused it of directly participating in the Ukrainian conflict on Ukraine's side. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, meanwhile, has raised concerns about the jets being sent to Ukraine. Lavrov said that these modern warplanes capable of carrying atomic weapons pose a nuclear threat.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, more than 23,000 Ukrainian men have entered Moldova illegally. The influx surged following Ukraine's decision to lower the mobilization age amidst a critical shortage of military personnel.
The Ukrainian military have faced challenges as significant losses and a stagnant frontline diminish early patriotic fervor. Men evade authorities to avoid conscription checks in Ukrainian cities. As it turns out, from February 2022 to the end of last year, approximately 15,000 men aged 18 to 59 illegally escaped to Moldova. The trend intensified further this year, with Moldovan frontier police recording over 7,000 illegal crossings in the first 5 months of 2024 alone. Moldova, sharing a more than 1,000-kilometer-long border with Ukraine, has provided refuge to thousands of Ukrainian refugees, predominantly women and children. Under Moldovan law, foreigners can seek protection through refugee status, humanitarian protection, political asylum, or temporary protection. Nearly 12,000 Ukrainians have benefited from the temporary protection since its introduction in March last year.
After nearly a week of restricted access, lawyer Sergei Safronov finally visited imprisoned opposition figure Vladimir Kara-Murza in a Siberian prison hospital. The delay sparked fears of Kara-Murza's well-being and ignited concerns over compliance with legal norms.
Kremlin opposition figure Vladimir Kara-Murza's attorney, Vadim Prokhorov, confirmed on Facebook that Kara-Murza is in relatively stable health. This follows ongoing worries about his capacity to endure prison conditions due to chronic health issues. Kara-Murza, a prominent critic of Russia's policies including its actions in Ukraine, faced a legal battle resulting in 25-year sentence on charges of treason. His health remains a focal point amid allegations of mistreatment. International outcry and condemnation from human rights advocates have condemned the treatment of Kara-Murza, labeling his imprisonment as politically motivated.
Since last week, a small Russian rescue tugboat, Professor Nikolai Mura, has been moored at a small port in Abkhazia, a separatist region of Georgia supported by Moscow. The decision to station the vessel in this location most likely follows increased attack by Ukrainian drones and missiles on Russian naval bases.
The vessel Professor Nikolai Mura, previously stationed in Novorossiysk, disappeared from radars on July 1st, only to reappear in Ochemchira a few days later. The Ukrainian drone attack on the Black Sea Fleet base in Novorossiysk on July 3rd may have prompted the vessel's relocation to Abkhazia, where it may be less vulnerable to similar incidents. Russia has signed an agreement with unrecognized Abkhazia to build a naval base in a small port city of Ochemchira. While the presence of Russian Navy ships currently appears to ensure security, Georgians fear it could escalate the Russian-Ukrainian conflict into their territory. Although relatively small, the port of Ochemchira can accommodate several large warships. It already served as a base for submarines during Soviet times. While typically classified as salvage tugboats, Project 22870 units can also serve as general-purpose support vessels, often equipped with missile systems.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news update and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.